everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I'm Roman. Really nice to be up here. Sorry that I just flew in from North Carolina, so I'm really bummed I got to miss some of the great presentations, but I will be visiting the YouTube channel very soon. So, quick question. I did this last year. Show of hands, how many of you have an EDS diagnosis or know somebody with EDS? Yeah, it's pretty much all of us, right? So, we all have a lot of these shared conditions and a lot of shared experiences because of that. So I'm going to be highlighting kind of where things have been in the past, like in the very beginning, like BC, and then to where things are now, and then where things are going to be going in the future in a very concise presentation so we can get to our meetings. So I think the history is really shocking and interesting. In 400 BC, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, documented the first cases of patients with bruising, bleeding, joint laxity in his writing Airs, Waters, and Places. And he saw these qualities in the nomads and the Scythians, also describing their multiple scars. And it was believed that scarring by these people was to be cauterization, to stiffen their joints around their elbows and their knees and places where subluxations occur. I was kind of shocked when I found that out, but thousands of years later, in 1657, the Dutch surgeon, and surgeon back then was a really loose term, barbers, and yeah, it's a loose term, but Job Genzoon van Meekeren observed a Spanish boy named George Albez, and he presented him regularly at the Academy of Leyland for his abnormal skin hyperextensibility. He could stretch his chin, I can't do this, but he could stretch his chin down to his chest or up to his eyes. He was kind of an abnormality, and so he was always kind of examined at this medical college. So then a couple hundred years later, Niccolo Paganini, any music people in the room might understand, one of the most celebrated virtuosic violinists of all time, has been noted to be able to play with such speed and vigor because of his hypermobility. He had a very tall and slender physique. This picture, his portrait on the left, is much more accurate. This caricature on the right that was drawn really documents the way that he positioned himself when he played. He had a thoracic deficit, he had spinal instability, and was permanently hunched, had a very long and lanky presentation, and had extreme joint laxity because of his proportions, could still play the violin. And we'll talk later, there are many other celebrities who are able to accomplish what they do because of hypermobility. But then in 1892, I'm going to try my best at this, Dr. Chernogubov in Russia, he was a dermatologist, provided the first comprehensive description of a syndrome causing laxity and fragility of the skin along with joint hypermobility. And this occurred when he presented two patients to the Moscow Dermatology Society, one of which being an epileptic male, neurological conditions that kind of puts a light bulb in my head, with elastic skin and the inability to hold sutures, which I think happens to a lot of us also. He also had dislocation and subluxation of joints, and I wish I should have put a picture, but I didn't know if it would gross people out. Molluscoid pseudotumors of his knees and elbows, they're like really nasty, kind of callousy skin lesions that were forming. They're scars. And so again, these are all really kind of very classical presentations of EDS, but you have the hypermobility also. Well, in 1899, Dr. Edward Ehlers demonstrated a patient with this textbook presentation, along with a history of delayed walking, which again, I think is a really fascinating comorbid condition, and frequent knee subluxations at the Dermatological Society of Denmark. And he gave further recognition of the syndrome when he published his findings in 1901. Well, this disseminated across Western Europe, and French physician Dr. Henry Alexander Danlos, I mean, I don't know how you pronounce it in French actually, but Ehlers-Danlos in the South, as we say. He described the disorder again in 1908 when he examined a patient who had these presentations but had multiple skin lesions, and he attributed them to trauma, and they seem to have had a vascular nature. He had vascular symptoms too. Which kind of brings up the conversation of subtypes. Well, following that, decades later in 1936, English physician Frederick Parkes Weber suggested the name for the disorder that we all know and love today, later performing an investigation of 32 patients in a cohort, concluding that EDS was likely an autosomal dominant trait, which we now know, I believe, is true today. I have to fact check myself on that. But then he also believed that deficits in collagen cause this EDS phenotype, which again, later today, we know causes certain EDS phenotypes. So classification of this disorder began in the late 1960s, and in 1988, 9 subcategories of the disorder were proposed. And by 1998, advancements in science narrowed these subcategories to 6 major subtypes, half of them including the very popular ones, classical, vascular, hypermobile. And all of them, these 6 categories, had a known genetic cause, except for hypermobile. And almost 30 years later, we still don't have one. But that comes later. By 2000, it was stated that 1 in 5,000 people were affected by EDS, making it a rare disease. And in 2005, also they knew that EDS affected males and females equally and of all racial backgrounds. So, surely this means that after 20 years, we would be finished classifying these disorders, understand their mechanisms well enough to treat them, and that the average physician would also have sufficient knowledge on at least the most common subtypes, classical, hypermobile, vascular. Well, I think the slide speaks for itself. I also made sure the Luke Skywalker one was the biggest because Star Wars Day was a few days ago. But no, a resounding no. So we're going to discuss the prevalence of this disorder, or these disorders, family of them. Contrary to much of the classification from the late 20th and early 21st century, we know that over a dozen subtypes of EDS are present that we know of, heavily ranging in prevalence for each subtype, as well as there being a strong sex difference in presentation. That biological women are heavily more affected than men due to things like joint laxity, estrogen, hormones, things like that. So we know that the majority of EDS subtypes are in fact quite rare. Most of them are, out of the 14 or so, as genetic testing exists for these rare subtypes and can be tested upon a suspected patient. But the National Organization for Rare Disorders, as of 2021, states that the incidence of all EDS types ranges from 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 5,000 births, which we said previously on that slide, with hypermobile EDS affecting 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 15,000, making it even more rare, yet it's also the most diagnosed subtype. However, this is really interesting. There's some cognitive dissonance going on. In 2019, there was a study conducted by a health system in Wales, UK, from almost 30 years of medical database data that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and joint hypermobility syndrome together had a prevalence of at least 1 in 500 people, therefore not making it rare at all and making it more common than diseases like diabetes. So, this is my segue, as I'm popular on the segue. Now to get down to brass tacks about prevalence. Well, in the United States, a rare disorder is a disease that affects 1 in 5,000 people, or greater, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 200,000. Due to a lack of proper diagnostics, widespread knowledge, and health disparities in our healthcare system, we can conclude that even a 1 in 500 statistic is likely unrepresentative of the true prevalence of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in general, but namely hypermobile EDS, as it is the most commonly diagnosed subtype without a genetic test. All other forms of EDS that I mentioned that are rare diseases are because there is a known gene and you can be tested for that. So something like oral manifestations in EDS. There are many, many subtypes that are rare, that are targeted toward one organ system, that are caused by a certain defect in a certain kind of connective tissue. This does not apply to hypermobile EDS, which I assume most of us in the room suffer from. And this deficit stems from a lack of dedicated research on the epidemiology and genetic origins of this disorder, namely in the United States. And this has a lot of burden. We've talked about burden. So we know how hard it is to get diagnosed, to be heard and understood while we're trying to get diagnosed. And if we are diagnosed, to even be able to receive comprehensive care. And that leads us to become our own advocates and experts on our own disease, which is kind of crazy. We're very difficult and complicated patients, and our pathways to treatment, for all of us, I'm sure, we can speak, have been very convoluted for various reasons, but namely because there's a substantial lack of understanding on our complex disease in the scientific and medical communities. So, who's fighting to change this? These are just a few relevant examples of many. The Bobby Jones, Chiari, and Syringomyelia Foundation, as we know, are doing many, many, many amazing things on an international scale to help standardize through common data elements with the International Patient Registry, think tank meetings, research colloquia, pertaining to Chiari, Syringomyelia-related disorders such as EDS, which all of us have kind of in combination, and that there's some connection between such. And then there are basic science, translational science research labs across the country, many that BJCSF partners with. There's a growing number of EDS researchers all across the country and in the world. And the Norris Lab at the Medical University of South Carolina is one of interest. They're the largest HEDS genetic lab in the country. And there are many other labs that I could highlight, but I was able to do research in the lab as an intern in the summer of 2021. I'll also be getting my MD and PhD from MUSC this summer, so I can speak to some degree of affiliation, I guess, on behalf of MUSC. So a noteworthy breakthrough that occurred in 2021, and I'm sure plenty of you saw articles everywhere, is that in the Norris Lab, Dr. Courtney Gensimer, pictured center, and Dr. Russell Norris are both credited with discovery of a Candida gene for HEDS. And it's really amazing. So the interns, this is the first year, that's when I was involved. We got to do projects and study the animal model of this Candida gene, and Camille Schreier, former Miss America who has EDS, came in for a visit, and there's a lot of media coverage. And everything that we had heard, there's just people responding with just resounding hope that, wow, we might be one step closer toward a genetic test, toward treatment options, but it's only the beginning. So, like I said, an animal model, a mouse model containing this Candida gene, this mutation, has been created and it's being studied. So we're actually able to see manifestations, and I remember we could see suspected things of like mast cell activation syndrome, gastroparesis, skin hyperextensibility, the list goes on, and there are limitless possibilities. So this is the first detailed look at the origins and manifestations of hypermobile EDS, where you possibly could be able to study the origins of these comorbid conditions. And on the Norris Lab's website, they do recognize that, this mutation is likely one of many. It isn't just a simple, like for classical EDS, mutation in collagen. There are many, many other factors, and they attribute that, but they're on the lookout, they're on the hunt. And there are other institutions too that are kind of doing similar things. But in the future, they hope, based off this discovery and future discoveries, to have a multidisciplinary connective tissue clinic. And at MUSC, it's really exciting. The last time I visited, they are starting an institute there, and they're bringing on faculty, and it's so enlivening and hopeful to see that a major medical institution understands, sees this disorder as something real, that it's worth being studied, that these patients are worth being seen and understood. So, like I said, where else in the world are these advancements being made? Well, researchers at the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom are working to redefine the process of a non-genetic test for EDS. For in this time, until we have a genetic test developed for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos, we need physical diagnostic criteria. And the Baton scale, as many of you might have experienced, can be convoluted. It leads you into a neutral territory. Sometimes people don't get diagnosed with EDS. They get hypermobility syndrome or some gray area, and they lose this diagnosis and lack access to care when they're very sick, but they don't have this diagnosis. So this, this revitalization, re-examining of these diagnostic criteria is huge until we develop a genetic panel for this disorder. What's really cool internationally also is Nicolaus Copernicus University in Poland is investigating another Candida gene for HEDS. This is a pretty recent discovery. It was found in a woman from a 200-person study aiming to find pathological mutations toward HEDS. There's only one article about it, and just as the Norris Lab indicates with their Candida gene, which that paper has been submitted for publication, and fingers crossed that it works out, because that could make a huge difference. So keep your fingers and toes crossed the paper gets published. But just again, at Nicolaus Copernicus University, they say that despite this discovery, researchers acknowledge that multiple mutations are at play. I think we now realize that, and it's a much more convoluted disorder than we even thought it was already. So this process will require much wider investigation. But now we have this media presence that's exploded within the past year or two. CNN has put articles out about this disparity of care for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Our very own Christy Cox put out an amazing book, Holding It All Together When You're Hypermobile. That was a best-selling book that is distributed in print and virtual format, and basically is like a guide and can reach, from one patient's experience to reach many others to where they can find that standard of care, find community, and find hope. What's also really cool, in addition to a lot of the publications around the Norris Lab and what they've done, I believe that I saw that in the state of South Carolina, May is now officially Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month. So that's a really huge recognition of the disorder. But as you can see with the 4 celebrities at the bottom, Sia, Billie Eilish, Halsey, and Jamila Jamil have all come out and talked about their diagnosis with EDS, their struggles with the disorder, how sick they are, and we never see that. We see them performing and they're amazing at what they do, and no one would ever think that they're so sick, but they are, and it's crazy. So I think people see the standard of, wow, if this person looks normal on the outside and they're so sick, anybody that walks in the door could really be that way. And I think it's really, really amazing that we've now seen in the media that this is a real disorder. I think there's a Grey's Anatomy episode that came out a couple years ago, and just getting representation in the media and knowing that anybody could have EDS, anybody could suffer from these conditions. So what does this all mean? Well, we as a combined community are working toward a future where we understand the causes of HEDS through combined collaborative, scientific, biomedical, patient-based research. And we're able to understand its downstream effects throughout the body. That's the end goal. To where life may not be centered around symptom management and for a body that's constantly falling apart. If we can find root causes to these conditions, that we might actually be able to get it at its source. Patients can receive targeted medicinal treatment then, instead of having to go under, the scalpel a million times a year and have to recover and be in braces and have life-saving surgery, but then need surgery again 6 months later, or have your mobility severely limited by a spinal fusion. That if we can actually target these things from the source and prevent and have preventative care and good diagnostics, we are then enabled to live fuller, more productive lives. So how does this become a reality? Well, obviously through continued research and collaboration between patients, between physicians, between scientists, between everybody else in between that. And therefore, that involves the education of other scientists and medical professionals. So a lot of the physicians and scientists affiliated with BJCSF are doing that. Things like the colloquia, giving educational talks, it's huge. But then also it's our job. We have an obligation to, as patients, in whatever ways possible, to do that education because we are experts on our own disease. And again, like I said, their patient involvement and advocacy is huge. Having your voice heard in whatever way possible is so important. And bottom line, to lay the groundwork for the future is to expand the body of researchers and practitioners. And through my experience, a very strong example is the Gensimer HEDS internship program at MUSC, which there are amazing opportunities that come from that, and one of the primary purposes is to expand this body of research, patient scientists, as they've coined it, which we are. We live with this disease, and we understand it, and we want to help other people who have it. So, I guess, shameless plug. I was an intern, and it was amazing because I got to study how this cancer gene mutation might affect, the ways that cells in connective tissue stick and move in the extracellular matrix. Maybe, just trying to understand this model and maybe see why HEDS connective tissue is so lame, for lack of a better word. And this opportunity, was really impactful because I know pursuing medicine was my route to make a difference in this community for a long time. But I came to realize that expanding knowledge through research was a really vital aspect of what I wanted, but it's also just a vital aspect in general. Nothing will get there until more research is performed. So from that experience, I got to, my final year of undergrad, I got to do an independent bioorganic chemistry project, studying therapeutics for wound healing and EDS, and studying mechanisms for how you can speed up wound repair and collagen, and not collagen, connective tissue. Because we're constant surgical patients, we always have constant scarring, and like that little boy in the 1600s, we don't hold sutures and things well. It's a painful part of our life. So I think wound care is something I found a lot of interest in. But after a year of research experience at Duke University, I'll be attending MUSC to obtain my MD PhD and hope to continue advocating and researching on behalf of those with EDS, Chiari, Syringomyelia, and all related disorders. And honestly, at some point in my career, would love to find the common denominator between them all because I believe there is one. So where are we at this moment? Well, we live in a time where we're seeing rapid progress in a short period of time. Knowledge is disseminating about these disorders slowly, but it is surely constantly picking up speed, almost at an exponential rate in certain areas. And we're seeing people with this disorder entering science, medicine, advocacy. People in the media are coming up with it now. It's all in its own way for each person expanding knowledge and awareness, which will eventually lead to the improvement of patient outcomes and therefore enact systemic change regarding how this disorder is seen and treated. That's a huge step. So why do we do this? It's because the network of knowledgeable physicians and surgeons is growing, yet small in size and still fragmented in this country. And EDS is much more common than you think, especially hypermobile. Countless people lack proper diagnostics, and that bars them from a chance at the right treatment. There's way too much variance in patient outcomes. Some receive comprehensive care and live near normal lives with proper therapy, taking the right steps every day, and others fight for their life each day for survival, not knowing what the next day will bring, or if insurance will approve something, or if they'll get off the wait list, for seeing a doctor before something really bad happens. And the differentiating factor there is access to care. So everybody's entitled to have a chance at a productive, fulfilling life where their chronic illness does not dictate that for them. So a standard is so important. So how do we keep this momentum? Well, it is our job. This is why we're here for today and tomorrow. It's to maintain involvement in our community on a personal scale and on a national scale. We have to spread awareness and tell our stories. This is targeted for your day-to-day life and tomorrow, very specifically. Tell your story. And also to support and rely on those who have the same journey as you, or on a similar path. Because even though we have, very different ways of getting to where we are, we've all heard the same, I don't feel understood, I was told I was crazy, I told I look normal, I was told that I don't have this, and we all find out that's all wrong. So you have to realize that your perspective is vital. It's so vital. Your perspective as a patient is so rare and needs to be seen, especially for scientists and medical practitioners, because they're not seeing that. They're practicing in their career and they're very busy, and they need that patient perspective to come in and say, hey, this is why you're doing this work. This is why you need to do this work. That also applies to policymakers and representatives. I'm here, there's a lot of us, and here are the numbers, here are the reasons. Please listen. So kind of to touch back on like the wellness theme and advocacy for yourself, is that hope is so important. We still don't have all these main answers. We still don't have a diagnostic test for HEDS. We still don't have a cure for Chiari. There's a lot of things that have to be done before we get there, but we're in a place where things are actually moving for the first time in decades, as you've seen in the history. Some of us have to fight a lot harder to be able to visualize that hope sometimes, because we feel really hopeless a lot of the time. But it's important to remember that we are in this together. We all share these experiences and these perspectives, and fighting battles each day can make it hard to see that big picture, to see that hope and light at the end of the tunnel. But we're here right now for this collective purpose of making our voices heard. And remember that our work at some point will make that kind of future possible. So please remember that today, tomorrow, all the days of your life, and thank you.